Insidious is a movie about a boy having the best nap of his life. A movie which is written by Lee Winnall and directed by James Wan, who both shot to fame after their 2004 smash hit Saw, a movie about tools. With their movie about your average trip to Home Depot becoming inescapable for many years, even to its own creators, because despite its massive success and what that would potentially mean for their careers, nothing they would work on for the next few years would quite live up to the infamy of the movie about the pedicure gone wrong. With them creating a horror movie about annoying short people, Dead Silence, James directing Death Sentence, and both of them creating a short movie called Doggy Heaven, which involves a white boy rapping for the culture before acting out the furry fantasy of disappointing God, none of which would prove to be as successful as Saw until the pair decided to create 2010's Insidious, which actually performed about as well as Saw at the box office while being created for a similar amount of money, raking in over $100 million while being made on a budget of $1.5 million because apparently people really like movies about little boys sleeping. And much like a speedrunner desperately holding on to their virginity, James would hold on to his money as he would take one look at Insidious after it was all said and done and do the exact same thing again, with the creation of the Conjuring universe quickly becoming the highest grossing horror franchise, leading him to become the 19th highest grossing director of all time as of 2021, which isn't bad for a guy who started his career by making a tutorial on how to fix an ingrown toenail. And speaking of engaging and incredibly fun activities, thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. The one and only downside I could possibly imagine to being in a coma is being unable to play War Thunder, a free-to-play, large-scale military multiplayer game with land, sea and air vehicles for whether you prefer your vehicles wet or dry. Being amongst the thickest of battles with the prettiest of graphics, with all it has to offer, War Thunder has me feeling like a diabetic in a candy store. With the advanced physics, variety of maps, and upgradable vehicles for you to choose from, War Thunder allows you to experience the game your own way. Available to play on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, War Thunder's incredible arsenal of content has been improved thanks to the Air Superiority update, an update about the air and how superior it is. Thanks to the update, advanced military equipment has been added to the game, the famous T-90M and Su-27, the new modification of Abrams Tusk II, the legendary fighter Gripen, and the F-15 Eagle. Explosion and fire effects have been completely reworked to be even more explosiony and fiery, as well as the new Volcano Valley map for air battles inspired by Kamchatka that allow you to test the latest aircraft in battles amongst the volcanoes. And if you're anything like me and have the uncontrollable urge to blow things up, in video games of course, War Thunder is the perfect game for you. You can get started right away by clicking the link at the top of the description, with all new players and those who haven't played War Thunder for half a year receiving some special bonuses. Rentals for the P-40E1 aircraft and M4 tank for a week, along with a free unique skin for them. A special decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, 3 premium vehicles for free, a week of premium account, and even more gifts. So if you're interested in hopping on War Thunder today, act fast because the American vehicle bonus season is gonna end soon. Insidious begins with us seeing the Lambert family as they've recently moved into their new home. Stay-at-home mother Renee, played by Rose Brine, the father Josh, a high school teacher played by Patrick Wilson, their 2 young sons Dalton and Foster, as well as their baby daughter Callie. It lulls you into a false sense of security, with it setting up expectations of it being a traditional haunted house movie, until you suddenly realise that you're watching Lee Winnall's slightly bizarre Star Wars fanfiction involving sleeping kids and Darth Maul desperately in need of a good skincare routine. Dalton's lured into the attic by some kind of entity, where he ends up falling off a ladder and hitting his head on the floor, with him apparently being lured up there by the ghost of Jared Fogle, as something enters his body, causing him to enter a coma, aka the good sleep. 3 months later, and Dalton is back at home and out of the hospital due to the doctors not really understanding what's wrong with him and finding him kind of weird to look at. Renee starts to notice strange occurrences around the house, like hearing voices through Callie's baby monitor, as apparently she's a fast learner. Foster telling his mother that it's scary when Dalton gets up and walks around at night, Renee having a little oopsie and seeing someone in Callie's room who isn't really there, and Josh finding the front door open when he could have sworn he closed it, because early onset dementia is no joke. Josh finds a not-so-subtle Billy the Puppet Easter egg on his chalkboard, and Renee finds a bloodied handprint on Dalton's bedsheet because he started his period early. After waking up and finding another man in her bedroom who isn't her husband, and Josh promising that he's not having a gay affair, they break the horror movie cliche of staying in the same house and move out, because debt is preferable to a paranormal haunting. And right after moving into the new house, immediately Renee walks past this little boy staring at the wall and admiring its cool-ass paint job. An incredibly terrifying and heart-pounding scene on account of kids being fucking evil. James Wan then proves that atmosphere, feel, and tension is everything in a horror movie, as he manages to pull off a genuinely unsettling shot in the middle of the day, as Renee's record changes on its own, and begins playing a cover of Tiptoe Through the Tulips by Tiny Tim, before seeing a little boy doing a funny Fortnite dance to it. A little boy who was actually not played by a little boy, but a preschool teacher in his late 20s, Ben Wolf, who unfortunately passed away in 2015 after being hit by a car. Never missing an opportunity to assault a child, Renee runs into the house, but the kid is gone. She finds him again after playing the creepiest game of hide and seek ever, after the little Victorian-looking ass child wins by jumping out of the cupboard at her. After sitting Josh and his mother Lorraine down to tell them whatever was haunting them in the previous house has followed them here, Lorraine tells them both that she's previously experienced the same thing, as it must be a woman issue. She tells them that she dreamt of something in Dalton's room last night that wanted to take him away like David Bowie in Labyrinth, before looking up to see Darth Maul right behind Josh. Something then destroys Dalton's room because screw little kids, before Lorraine says that she knows the only person who could help them, an old lady. She'll clean that room right up. Elise Rainier, Lorraine's old friend, and a psychic who shares something in common with a schizophrenic. She sees things that aren't really there. But just like real life, in this world the schizophrenics are right, because there's an alternate realm named the Fervor, where all of the tortured souls and the unsightly horrors like the ghosts of the dead like to hang out, like the Swedish. Elise, with the help of her paranormal investigative friends, Tucker and Specs, is able to access this world to offer the Swedes some IKEA meatballs in hopes that they stay away. Specs actually being played by franchise writer Lee Whannell, who also played Adam in the original Saw, because why pay someone else when you can just do it yourself? And after arriving and seeing the scariest thing a person could possibly see, females, Elise, Specs, and Tucker realize that the family are most definitely not joking. They conduct a ritual where Elise has Specs draw what she's currently seeing, which is apparently the ghost of Jeffrey Epstein, as he's currently standing in the corner of Dalton's room. Elise proceeds to explain to the family that while Dalton's physical body is here, his spiritual one is not. The ghosts have followed them here, not because their house is haunted, but because their child is. Burn it. She explains that there are people in this world who can have out-of-body experiences and that they're called travelers. Yeah, because they travel to their local dealer's house. The traveling that she is referring to is known as astral projection, where the spiritual body leaves the physical one. And that's exactly what's happened to Dalton, except this time he's gone too far and something has taken him away. Much like the Swedish demons from earlier, astral projection being something that many people actually believe in, with it appearing in many different cultures and religions all over the world throughout time, in one way or another. And something that James and Lee thought would make a great plot device in a movie, as they thought that it was something that had been underutilized. Elise explains that Dalton has been traveling ever since he was a baby, but was unaware of what he was doing, as he thought they were simply just dreams. And because he thought they were just dreams, he taught himself not to be scared of the experiences, causing him to go much further than he ever really should have, resulting in him being trapped in the Fervor. And they've been experiencing these hauntings around their homes, due to the spirits from the Fervor arriving, as they crave life and can sense an uninhabited body to take. Whereas the demon that Elise saw in the corner of Dalton's room simply exists to cause pain and nothing else. The longer that Dalton's spiritual and physical body is separated, the easier that it's going to be for the demon to possess him, so they really should do something about it. Something that involves Elise hitting the gas mask bong, and apparently her tolerance doesn't seem to be that great, as the demon is then able to speak through Elise's body, before Dalton suddenly appears standing right next to them, before trashing the room like the ungrateful little shit that he is. Elise explains that the only way to get Dalton back from the Fervor is that if someone heads in there themselves to go and get him. So Lorraine and Elise reveal to Josh that he's actually a traveler as well, but is unable to remember anything about it. When he was 8 years old, he would be visited by an old woman in his dreams who's slightly obsessed with little boys. She'd also appear in the background of his photographs, with her slowly getting closer and closer with each one, before Lorraine eventually contacted Elise to suppress his memory of astral projection to keep this strange woman away who's desperately trying to touch an 8-year-old boy. Hypnotizing Josh, they send him to a dark, mysterious alternate dimension inhabited by countless tortured souls. Liverpool. And waking up in a different version of his previous home, he finds a red door in the attic that takes him to the demon's domain, where he's subjected to the absolutely demonic act of about 5 crossfades in about 5 seconds. After the editor is done playing with Windows Movie Maker, we then see the demon sharpening its claws as the Tiny Tim cover of Tiptoe Through the Tulips plays once again, as it's his jam. The creature attacks Josh, but he's able to flee with Dalton, as this ancient demonic otherworldly being is nothing more than a slight annoyance, before they find themselves surrounded by spirits. Renee uses her mystical power of speaking to guide them both back with her voice to allow them to cross back over into the real world. And just like the man that he is, Josh is stopped in his tracks at the sight of a woman, except she's kinda weird looking, and it's the evil spirit from his childhood. I'm not here to judge. And after shouting at some old lady while Dalton is chased by Darth Maul with the zoomies, they wake back up in the real world. Elise decides to take a picture of Josh, because I guess he does look kinda cute, and she looks at it to reveal that his body has actually been possessed by the evil woman's spirit. Before Elise is killed for it, as Josh wakes up and aggressively touches an old woman, because there can only be one weird old lady in this house. Renee then comes across Elise sleeping on the job, and the first movie comes to an end with Renee looking at the picture and realizing that she isn't the cutest girl in the room. A first movie that seems to almost exist for James to prove that he is capable of creating a successful horror movie without using the extreme violence and over-the-top nature that was found in the Saw franchise. Which in itself isn't exactly the truth, despite whatever the public's perception of the first Saw movie might be. Because if you do rewatch the first movie, it's a lot less violent and in your face with its over-the-top nature compared to its sequels, with it relying a lot more on the disturbing idea of it all instead of the disturbing visuals. That came later. And when you watch Insidious, it's apparent that James and Lee have a lot of respect for creating a genuine experience that aims to creep you out, because they don't simply rely on loud music and jump scares, with them both saying in various interviews over the years that they're not really a fan of the false scare. They don't want to abuse or waste the viewer's time and energy with repeated build-ups for a jump scare for something that wasn't even a threat. They've stated that by doing that, it works against the very movie that you're trying to create, as you're teaching the viewers not to be scared of what's happening, which in turn greatly dampers the real scare when it does eventually come. Something that James seems to have succeeded with in this movie, with him actually being a believer in ghosts and channeling that energy to his advantage and creating something that would genuinely terrify him. Which isn't all that hard when you take into account that both of them were raised in Australia, explaining why their minds are completely demented. And speaking of being completely demented, James would take one look at his highly successful paranormal movie involving children being scarred for life and say, yeah, I'm gonna do that again. And do it again he would, thus spawning his alternate, also highly successful paranormal series involving children, The Conjuring, which is kind of hilarious considering that he conjured up all of that money into his bank account. And only a month after The Conjuring would release, Insidious 2 would as well, despite originally James and Lee having no plans to make a sequel, because despite them being incredibly successful at what they do, they spend the whole time just hoping that the movie will do well enough. And much like they did with the original Saw movie, they hadn't written the movie with a sequel in mind, because I guess they were just perfectly content with leaving Renee with a funny looking woman for a husband. But ultimately, they ended up deciding to come back and make another entry, with it being the very first sequel that James would ever direct himself, as the pair had thought that they created an interesting concept with the further and wanted to come back to go even further. And go even further they did, as the movie begins in the Lambert family home back in 1986, aka the Dark Ages. A younger Elise and her colleague Carl meet Lorraine for the first time, as Elise learns about the terrifying thing known as a woman, and decides to suppress Josh's memory of astral projection to stop the pesky woman from trying to touch him in his sleep. It then jumps ahead as it proceeds to pick up almost immediately where the original movie had ended, as Renee is being interviewed by the police about the death of Elise. But I guess it's not really that important, as the entire family, Josh included, have now moved in with his mother Lorraine, while the investigation is underway at their home. And unsurprisingly, with having a woman in their house, strange things begin to occur, with Renee hearing the piano play a song that she had written in the previous movie, and finding Callie on the floor next to her crib as she's figured out how to levitate, just like all babies do. Renee obviously doesn't fully trust Josh, but almost doesn't want to admit it to herself, with James 1 telling Renee's actor Rose to act as if Josh has had an affair with her character and to channel that energy into being weary of him while trying to keep the family together for the kids. Because being cheated on by your significant other is basically the same as being possessed by an evil spirit. At least that's what my ex-girlfriend told me. In Elise's now unoccupied home, Specs and Tucker find a videotape that Elise and Carl made back in the 80s before immediately bleaching their eyes. They then play another tape and see that it's from when Elise and Carl hypnotized Josh as a kid to try and make him forget about astral projection. But while analyzing it for themselves, they notice something strange in the background, Meanwhile, back at Lorraine's house, she's startled by the terrifying sight of a woman who most definitely doesn't live there, before Dalton tells his mother that he overhears his dad speaking to absolutely nobody in the middle of the night, because having a wife and kids will do that to a man. Specs and Tucker proceed to digitize the footage and show it to Lorraine, where after brightening it, it's revealed that an adult version of Josh is visible in the background, despite the original footage being from 1986 when Josh was a child and apparently incredibly proficient at Adobe After Effects. And with the second entry, it starts to become apparent that James and Lee are leaning away from the classic haunted house tale that the first movie resembled, as they refer to Insidious as more of a supernatural domestic thriller, as for the most part, it follows two separate stories in parallel, while it focuses a lot more on the history of these hauntings, before they eventually come back to meet. Renee's then told by the police that the bruises around Elise's neck are not consistent with Josh's hands, and the plot point is immediately dropped and never brought up again, because who really cares about old people anyway? Well, I guess the police don't, because after being faced with one minor inconvenience in their investigation, they make like me after starting many of my side projects, and immediately give up. Renee then sees the same woman that Lorraine saw, before hearing her upstairs and slapping Callie, and getting incredibly offended at it, as she's the only one allowed to slap her daughter. After opening the door to find the room completely empty, she's then slapped herself for somehow misplacing her baby. We then see Specs and Tucker contact Elise's old friend Carl, as they've got some questions that only Elise can answer for them. So using some dice to communicate with the dead, they're told to go to an old hospital that Lorraine used to work at. An old hospital where she remembers a patient named Parker Crane who once grabbed Josh, before riding down in an elevator with him a few days later, to then be told that he died the previous day after testing the speed of his terminal velocity against the concrete. We then see Josh in the bathroom, taking a rather unorthodox approach to dental hygiene by skipping it entirely. We then hear someone who he refers to as Mother, telling him that his dead soul is killing his living skin. As much like Elise pointed out in the original movie, the souls of the dead crave life and will do anything to have it, with Mother telling whoever is currently inhabiting Josh's body that he can only live if he kills them. Just like the investigation into Elise's death, a plot point that isn't exactly elaborated on, with it never really being explained how killing anyone would grant him life in Josh's body, unless they're referring to killing them so they won't be suspicious, instead of somehow their deaths contributing to some kind of power. And to add fuel to the fire of Renee's suspicion, she starts to recognize the song that the piano has been playing randomly, and upon playing it for Josh herself, he seems to have absolutely no recollection of it, because I guess it just wasn't that good to begin with. Lorraine, Carl, Specs and Tucker head to Parker's old address when suddenly the rocking horses begin moving on their own, before making the absolutely vile and disgusting discovery of a small child. A small child that tells them they need to be quiet, otherwise she'll make me kill you, before simply disappearing. I hate it when my kids do that. Dalton's woken up due to a rather obnoxious cold caller speaking to him through his tin can and rope phone, before suddenly realizing that it's coming directly out of the closet on the other side of the room. And after talking to the voice on the other end of the line, insisting that he's too young for insurance, he suddenly finds himself in an incel's worst nightmare. A room full of women. We then see fake Josh in the piano room, acting like a completely sane person as he talks to literally no one, telling them to stop trying to communicate with Renee, or he's gonna start punching the air or something. We then finally see that the real Josh has been trapped in the fervor this entire time, and the only thing that he's been able to do is make like the average Twitch viewer and simp over a woman who sleeps in bed with another man. Back in Peter Parker's house, Lorraine comes across a picture and recognizes it as the home intruder with a briskly paced walk, before a spirit attempts to commit insurance fraud and tells them that they're the mother of Parker Crane. Thanks, Spirit. After coming across my favourite room growing up, the murder room, they discover that it's due a clear out as it's full of dead bodies covered in white sheets. They then come across newspaper clippings describing a murderous bride in black, the woman who was appearing in all of those pictures with Josh as a kid. And after using his magical psychic abilities, Carl discovers that Parker is a Discord moderator, as he's actually just a dude who likes to dress up in women's clothes and commit horrific acts of violence against other people, meaning that Josh's body is currently inhabited by the spirit of Parker Crane, who when alive, embarked on a murderous spree simply because his mother told him to, and due to him wasting his prime years committing unspeakable acts against the innocent, Parker wanted his childhood back, explaining why he was after Josh as a child. And once Josh re-entered the fervor as an adult, Parker pulled the old snooze you lose and took the opportunity to take over his body before Josh could return to it. And after finding out that someone is controlling her son's body like a sadist playing The Sims, Lorraine tells Renee what's going on, and they send Carl to try and sedate Parker, to be able to reach out to the real Josh. But Parker, like the mama's boy that he is still in communication with her and lets his mummy issues get the best of him as he chokes Carl unconscious. And once Specs and Tucker attempt to intervene, they're knocked out too, as we then see Carl wake up in the fervor with Josh. And while there, they see one of the spirits from the original movie entering the house that the Lamberts used to live in as it's trying to get Callie, with it being revealed that Josh himself was the one who rather rudely let the front door open, with Elise appearing there to send the demon back to hell, explaining why it disappeared. Elise tells the pair that they must find the woman's home in the fervor and use her memories in order to draw the spirit out of Josh's body. And while on their journey to tell Parker's mummy on him, they find themselves back in Josh's home as a child as he's about to be hypnotized, explaining how Josh ended up standing in the background of the footage, looking like an extra who didn't get paid enough. Young Josh tells old Josh where to find the woman's home, before we see Parker lure Lorraine and Renee back to the house. And upon arriving, much like the weird kid from school, he immediately begins running after the girls. But Dalton, not really being the biggest fan of his dad or women in general, saves his mother by hitting Parker over the head, giving Renee and the kids the opportunity to lock themselves in the basement. But much like the British eyeing up a piece of already inhabited land, Parker's going to kill them all and take what he wants anyway. And back in the fervor, they find themselves in Parker's home as they see him as a child being forced to wear female clothes by his mother before she assaults him for being really bad at drawing pictures. And Dalton, apparently able to sleep on command, sends himself into the fervor to save his dad, just like he did for him in the previous movie. And just as Parker breaks in and is about to peacefully interact with the locals, Elise kills the spirit of Parker's mother, as apparently you can make the dead more dead. This causes Parker to leave his body, giving Josh the opportunity to finally return to it with the help of Dalton. Carl suppresses both Josh and Dalton's memories of astral projection because remembering things is for nerds. And the movie then comes to an end with Specs and Tucker paying a visit to Jenna Ortega's house for some reason, with the spirit of Elise following them, and much like the end of the previous movie, seeing something absolutely horrifying, but much unlike the end of the previous movie, completely refusing to elaborate because screw you. The next movie, Insidious Chapter 3, exists to prove that Lee is capable of counting to 3, but not James, as he wouldn't direct any of the movies going forwards, with him having a scheduling conflict due to Furious 7, canonically the 18th entry in the Fast and Furious franchise. Instead, Chapter 3 would be franchise writer Lee Winnall's directorial debut, as he would debut his directorial all over the place, with Lee staying on to continue writing all of the other movies going forward, with him working together with Scott Teems on Insidious The Red Door, a movie about a blue door. Chapter 3 is a prequel to the events of the original movie, which is almost a byproduct of the way James and Lee created the movie when they proceeded to kill off one of the main characters integral to the universe, as they didn't create it with any sequels in mind, meaning that we're left not knowing what caused Elise to create the shocked YouTube thumbnail reaction, and we're never going to know because it will never be addressed. It takes place 3 years before Dalton had the best nap of his life, and focuses on how Elise ended up working with Specs and Tucker after an unlikely friendship was created between the trio after coming together to help a 17-year-old girl named Quinn Brenner suffering from an unfortunate case of a dead mum. She pays a visit to Elise's house, passing through the red arches in her front yard, resembling many of the red doors we've seen throughout the franchise, which serves as a way to symbolically represent something. Probably. Quinn wants to communicate with her mother Lily, who's been dead for over a year and a half, but has found it rather difficult on account of her rotting in the ground somewhere. But Elise, currently out of touch with her psychic abilities, and not usually offering to use them to help anyone, feels sorry for Quinn and decides to give it a try. And upon trying to communicate with the creepy dead, almost immediately stops trying to communicate because they're creepy and dead. After Elise sees something that scares her into stopping, Quinn returns home, where we see that she lives with her younger brother Alex and father Sean, who's been really struggling to keep things together since Lily passed away. And in an interview for the previous movie, James and Lee stated that if they were to ever make a third entry in the series, then they'd have to move away from the Lambert family, because continuously traumatizing the same child gets old after a while. Now moving on to a different child, we see that Quinn is attending an audition at a theatre school when we see someone in the distance waving at her before disappearing because girls are scary. After doing her audition in front of James Wan himself as one of the theatre directors, she proceeds to break a leg, but a little too late, after seeing the mysterious figure once again before being hit by someone apparently trying really hard to run a child over. In the hospital, she makes like the average medieval peasant in winter and fucking dies, before being jump scared in the fervor server by an asthmatic before respawning because she has hacks. 3 weeks later in her apartment complex, with casts on both of her legs as she's being a bit dramatic about the entire thing, a senile old lady named Grace, my favourite type of old lady, tells Quinn that the man who can't breathe was calling her name last night, as apparently he really needed her to pass the inhaler. Almost immediately, strange things begin to occur, with Quinn's momentary death allowing something to attach itself to her, first being seen, well heard, after her father gives her a bell to use to call for help, because apparently breaking your legs removes your ability to speak or something, when suddenly it rings on its own in the middle of the night as we see a man standing behind her. Bill Cosby. While falling asleep, Elise then sees a vision of something terrible happening to Quinn, as she often dreams about little girls. And now being convinced to help her, while trying to call out to Lily, the man who can't breathe appears and proceeds to breathe all over the place, leaving a nice big stain on the carpet as he tries to give her a sloppy kiss. And while Quinn is on webcam to her friend Maggie, as this is 2007, back in the olden days when he needed to use Skype, Maggie says that she can see someone standing next to Quinn before Quinn turns to see a man struggling with the basic concept of curtains. A scene that was deliberately made as scary as possible for Quinn's actor, due to the director Lee Whannell keeping the design of the creature hidden away from the cast until they'd shoot with it, helping to keep their reactions to be as genuine as possible. He throws her broken-boned ass off the bed just before her dad comes running in to find her on the floor doing her best impression of a non-crippled person. We learn that the old woman Grace has passed away, and Quinn wakes up in the middle of the night to the oxygen mask wearing man pushing her down a hallway and throwing her into a room with a red door, because that's where he keeps all of his women. It's the room directly above her apartment, and while lying on the floor screaming for help, she sees a version of herself that can't see her because it has no eyes. The creature, with no hands, feet or facial features, desperately tries to crawl its way towards Quinn, performing some kind of slug maneuver before Quinn's saved by her father as he comes running towards the screams. Sean follows the same footsteps seen in Elise's house and follows them to the window, where he looks outside to see a man napping really hard on the concrete below before Quinn looks, followed by the masked man trying to pull her out. Not sure what the best approach is for dealing with a levitating asthmatic, Sean pays Elise a visit, where we find out that she stopped doing psychic readings for people because after her husband died over a year ago, she attempted to visit him in the fervor, resulting in something latching onto her and following her back. A woman who would repeatedly scream that she's going to kill her every time that she would try to use her abilities, resulting in her eventually being killed by someone with the appearance of a woman at the end of the original movie. But deciding that Quinn really needs the help, she returns to the Brenner home to perform a ritual to contact the demon, where she finds herself in the further. And while there, she comes across the Lambert's home from the original movie, a family that she doesn't even know exists at this point, where she's grabbed and attacked by the bride in black after unknowingly witnessing her death, before deciding that she actually doesn't want anything to do with this, as she changes her mind more than a person with dementia. Out of options with Elise gone, the Brenner family decide to contact some ghost hunters they've seen online, Specs and Tucker, where they're invited to the house in hopes of cleansing it. Meaning that not only did Lee Whannell write and direct this movie, but he also starred in it. After setting up a camera on Quinn's forehead, they watch her get out of bed as she's supposed to be sleeping, and continue to watch as the camera rises and begins to move across the room, as if she's just casually gotten out of bed and has proceeded to walk, as if she doesn't currently have 2 broken legs. Possessed and depressed, she attacks them with a wrench for breaking the casts off her legs by violently kicking them against the bed frame, because pain is merely a made-up concept. After ruining the cool papier-mâché sculptures the doctors made for her, she picks up a box cutter and her legs make like Rice Krispies as they snap, crackle and pop as she walks directly over to them. After attempting to use the box cutter on a box that suspiciously resembles her own neck, they manage to restrain her before she can. Specs and Tucker are way out of their depth here and are about to run away at the sight of a strong female woman when suddenly Elise returns as she meets Specs and Tucker for the very first time. Elise explains that a spirit used to live in this building a very long time ago and is now feeding on Quinn like a pit bull in a preschool after getting access to her after the accident. So after heading back to the fervor, Elise meets one of the man's previous victims and finds out that he lives in the apartment directly above the Brenners. And after entering it for herself, she ends up finding her late husband. Yeah, about a year too late, where he attempts to convince Elise to stay here permanently with him, causing her to realize that it was all just a trick. The man who can't breathe appears, very much breathing, albeit poorly, and then shows off his rather funny looking rescue dog. Knowing that that was a part of Quinn that was kept here when she died, Elise tries to return her back to Quinn to make her whole again, but not wanting anyone to take his Pokemon away from him, he throws the old woman across the room, so she responds by performing a fatality on him and dropping him through the floor. With the help of Quinn's mother Lily, Quinn's able to to resist the demon as it has a hold of her, giving her the strength to pull off its mask and kill its unvaccinated ass. With Quinn now saved, Elise rekindles her love for looking at dead people, so teams up with Specs and Tucker to create the trio that we would see in the first Insidious movie. And to continue its trend of sequel baiting, the movie then comes to an end with Lorraine's dog barking at a floating head in the middle of the room. As you do, before evil Darth Maul shows up to bait an already existing sequel that came out 5 years prior. An already existing sequel from years ago that doesn't focus quite as hard on jump scares as the rest of the franchise will going forward, making the third movie the breaking point where things started to steer away from James and Lee's original philosophy on scares, as while monetarily it's going to be as strong as ever, scare-wise, things are starting to resemble what they didn't want the original to be. Insidious 4: The Last Key is a movie about someone losing their one and only key to the house and having to call a locksmith to get back inside, as well as being a movie directed by Adam Robitel, who's worked with Elise's actor before, Lynn Shay, as they both previously played characters in the movie 2001 Maniacs, that didn't in fact come out in 2001 but 2005, because time is a made-up concept, with him previously directing a movie called The Taking of Deborah Logan, a found-footage horror movie documenting someone suffering with Alzheimer's and their mental decay. So another movie about someone losing their keys. The Last Key takes place after the third movie, but shortly before the first, because they've got that weird Star Wars thing going on. It focuses on Elise and her origin story, where she must eventually confront her past, like that weird lump I've been pretending doesn't exist. Beginning in New Mexico in 1953, you know, like Mexico, but new. We see Elise as she lives with her parents, Audrey and Gerald, as well as her younger brother Christian, as they live right next to the prison that their father is a warden at. Nothing like the nice relaxing screams of a violent prison beating. Elise and Christian encounter the ghost of a small boy in their bedroom, and after it appears behind Christian causing him to scream, their father walks in and starts beating them, because kids are annoying. Elise tells him what they saw, but two kids already being expensive enough to look after, continues to attack her while trying to get her to admit she made it up. And as punishment for her not doing what he wants, he locks her in the cellar because that's where all the cool kids hang out. And while down there, a spirit starts to talk to her and lures her over to a red door by stating that she's the only one who can open it because apparently spirits don't have hands. And whatever it is that's talking to her recognizes the power that she possesses and manipulates Elise into unlocking the door, followed by a hand in desperate need of a manicure emerging and attaching the key to itself that she used to unlock it. Her mother finds her down there, standing in front of a plain wall, looking like one of those dogs with brainworms, when suddenly one of the electrical wires descends from above and kills her. After Gerald comes downstairs to find his wife hanging about, it jumps ahead to 2010 as someone rings her asking for help, but once she asks for the address, she realizes that it's the house she grew up in. Elise, Bex and Tucker head out to the town of Five Keys in New Mexico, which much like the real Mexico, is entirely fictional. With the house looking like an untouched time capsule from the 1950s, they meet the current occupant Ted Garza before entering her childhood bedroom alone. Hidden beneath the bed, Elise finds an old whistle that was given to her younger brother Christian that supposedly went missing when they were little kids. And after looking around the room, a silhouette approaches her from behind, before it's revealed to be the equally as terrifying Dirty Laundry. With a video feed being watched by Specs and Tucker, they spot a woman in front of Elise who grabs the whistle from around her neck and shouts help her. Elise recognizes the ghost from when she was 16, as she'd previously met her in the house, before being threatened by her father again for talking about spirits. But this time, Elise retaliates by grabbing him by the head and showing him how he will die alone and afraid. Take that, Dad. Elise would run away from the home after that encounter, leaving her younger brother behind to face the wrath of their abusive father. Her younger brother, who she would meet all of these years later, after coming across his daughters, Melissa and Imogen, in a diner, before realizing that he wants absolutely nothing to do with her. But before they go, Elise gives Melissa a picture of the whistle and asks her to give it to Christian because he's been known to really like to blow things. And that night, Elise attempts to communicate with the woman again when suddenly they hear the whistle. They're led down into the basement by the sound, where they find a secret door that she unlocks using her father's old keys. And once they're inside, they find a rather funny looking whistle in the form of a woman, who's indeed not a ghost, but very much real. Ted suddenly appears behind them and locks Elise and Tucker in, stating that they were never meant to find this, before going back upstairs to find Specs. And just as Ted is about to shoot Specs, apparently metal pipe beats gun and bookshelf beats skull. With Ted dead, after the police arrive, they take the woman away to safety, and Elise, Tucker and Specs find out that she's been missing missing for 4 months. The police want them to stick around for the few days, and with the current owner of the house offering them a mind-blowing discount on the place, they decide to stay. With Elise being interviewed at the police station, Christian and his daughters arrive to look for the whistle, and Melissa is lured into the basement before being punched in the head by the man with the funny manicure. The demon then turns a key in her neck to put her on mute, before doing the same in her chest to put her on standby mode. Elise returns to find her down there taking a danger nap, when she's taken off to hospital with her father, while Imogen stays with Elise at the house to help after she discloses that she also sees things too. Yeah, well, I see them 3. After searching the basement, they find a piece of clothing in an air vent, causing Elise to experience a vision where she sees her father keeping a woman down there just like Ted did, as whatever male lives in the house has their brain manipulated by the demon, kinda like a gas leak. In the vision, Elise sees that the woman is the ghost that she's been seeing, someone that her father kept and killed. As we see back when Elise was 16, right before she ran away from home, that person that she saw in the house wasn't a ghost, but was in fact a pre-ghost, as she had just escaped right before being killed by her father. And further in the air vent, Elise discovers a suitcase containing the skull of the woman and her various belongings. And after turning the corner, she discovers many more suitcases, all containing the same thing. The demon then appears in one of them and jump scares her into the further with her childhood self, who tells her that the man with the keys is the one who opens all of the red doors, before he appears and grabs Elise. With once again the demon being kept away from the cast to ensure that their reactions are as genuine as possible, with Javier Botet using his natural born ability of being Spanish to accurately portray the demon, and as well as playing many other modern Hollywood monsters, including the leper from the It movie, he works in a way where he stays in character as much as possible, we're only coming out of it to adjust for shots. With Specs and Tucker unable to wake up the narcoleptic old lady, Imogen, having the same abilities as Elise, agrees to be hypnotized to be sent into the further to try and retrieve her. And while there, the dead woman directs her through the red door and into the prison where both Elise and the spirit of Melissa are being kept. Elise is then given the opportunity to hurt her father in the same way he hurt her, and not one to pass up a good old-fashioned whipping does just that, but quickly realizes that she's feeding the demon hatred and she's allergic to it. It responds by taking Imogen and is about to kill Elise, but her father's spirit, who's no longer under its control, proves why you should never apologize to anyone, steps in, says sorry, and then turns to ash. After the demon takes away Elise's ability to scream, Imogen throws her the whistle that she uses to summon her mother, who smacks it almost as hard as my mother smacked me. Elise is then given her voice back, and all 3 of them return to their bodies, where Elise finally makes up with her brother after all of these years of being separated, because years of constant abuse isn't really that bad. Elise, Specs and Tucker drive back to their home, where Elise dreams about the Lamberts and crackhead Darth Maul. She then gets a call from Lorraine asking for help, because that's how we create an entire franchise with a character we killed almost 10 years ago. Insidious the Red Door is a children's movie about colours and the dangers of going to college, because you might find yourself being possessed by an ancient demonic being hell-bent on following you around your entire life, otherwise known as student debt. Directed by Patrick Wilson in his directorial debut, the actor who played Josh in this movie and the original 2, it's also the first one with the screenplay not written by Lee Winnall, as Scott Teems, known for helping to write Halloween Kills and Exorcist Believer, would come on board to help adapt the story that he and Lee had written together. Insidious 5 begins by actually being Insidious 3, as it's a sequel to the second movie, picking up 9 years after its events, where Josh was brought back from the further, and he and Dalton had their memories of astral projection erased, to ensure that they would never accidentally end up in a situation like the first 2 movies, except not really, because there's another one. 9 years may have passed since the horrific events, but things aren't looking good for the Lambert family, as Josh and Renee's love life is about as exciting as that time I had a mental breakdown, in that they're no longer together, because Renee can't stop imagining Josh in a dress. Josh and Dalton's relationship also seems to be strained, due to Josh struggling with his memory, since having a chunk of it erased to help protect his family. Dalton is leaving for art school, which is like normal school, except for dickheads, and Josh drives him there in hopes of them having some sort of connection. They don't. Dalton meets his roommate Chris and seems to be a bit startled to find out she's female, because I guess girls are kinda smelly, before making his dad cry like the loving, caring son that he is. Take care of me, love for me, and provide for me my entire life? Screw you, Dad. All Dalton knows about the events of the original movie is that he was in a coma, and ever since recovering from the coma, he's been afraid of the dark because he's racist against the shadow people. And in Dalton's first class, during a meditative exercise, Dalton ends up drawing the red door, except he forgot how colours work, when suddenly something grabs onto his hand, causing him to bleed, while simultaneously waking up Josh. The meditation has let something in, and since Dalton and Josh are both connected, Josh feels it too. Struggling with the memory loss that's put a strain on his family due to his his ex-wife gaslighting him about not being able to remember things, Josh decides to try and figure out what's going on with him and goes to the hospital, not because he's suffering from the condition known as being an American, but to get an MRI scan, because if there's anything he needs in his life right now, it's crippling medical debt. And while getting the scan, the power suddenly goes out, and he finds himself trapped inside with the doctor not responding. After a while of being stuck, he looks down to see someone about as happy as a priest when they see a choir boy frantically approaching him, but suddenly the lights turn back on, and the doctor tells him that he's been sleeping for the last 15 minutes, and he should really hurry up because he's got other patients to see. Like a reverse Rolling Stone, Dalton proceeds to paint his black door red with his own blood, like a perfectly normal person, before spotting a bloodied handprint on Chris's bed, just like the one his mother found in the original movie, before suddenly something jumps out of the bed at him, because you never really know what girls keep in their beds. Demons, mostly. They head to a frat party together, and Chris takes Dalton upstairs to their bedrooms because she really wants to sniff their underwear or something, before Dalton comes across someone puking in the bathroom with white eyes. It's the spirit of someone who'd previously died at one of the parties, stuck in a permanent purgatory of being a lightweight. And while in a bedroom that he shouldn't be in, he hides under the bed after hearing someone coming, before the ghost proceeds to puke all over his face, because sharing is caring. Later, while back in his room, he falls asleep while painting, and accidentally enters the further. And while Chris has moved rooms because boys do smelly penis farts, Dalton, for some reason, decides to walk to her room in the middle of the night and completely terrify her while she can't see him by playing a song on her melodica and throwing it on the table and running away, to which she responds to seeing the floating instrument in her room by heading right to Dalton and believing absolutely everything he has to say. And the next day, while doing memory exercises, we see that someone is watching Josh from outside, with them progressively getting closer and closer, probably trying to figure out what this man's got taped on his windows. Eventually, they get a little too close and jump right through the window because he could really do with some natural light in here. He tries to give Josh a high five, but after he declines, he's knocked unconscious temporarily into the fervor before snapping back to reality. There goes gravity. While trying to help Dalton, Chris finds out about astral projection and finds a video that Specs and Tucker uploaded to the internet explaining it, so they decide to sneak back into the frat house and talk to the puke ghost because it tasted so good last time. And while in there, Dalton enters the fervor, leaving Chris alone to be attacked by something. She's choked unconscious just as Dalton returns to find the lipstick demon, aka Devil Darth Maul, crouched over her, before they both suddenly wake up, because I guess he's not really much of a threat anyway. After Josh was attacked, he found a box containing information about the father he never knew, a man named Benjamin Burton, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1978, with his file containing notes about astral projection. And after he sees his picture, he realizes that it was the aggressive high-fiver. Taking this information to his ex-wife Renee, she finally tells him about the events of the first two movies, when suddenly their son Foster walks in with a picture that Dalton has just finished, depicting their father being possessed during the events of the second movie, which somehow convinces both Renee and Josh that Dalton is in trouble. Somehow, Dalton enters the fervor and finds himself in recreated scenes from the original two movies before being jump-scared by the lipstick demon and sent back to the real world, except not really, because just like with Josh at the end of the original movie, it isn't Dalton who's been sent back. Chris enters the room thinking that it's Dalton, as we see the real Dalton being held in the lipstick demon's domain as the cover of Tiptoe Through the Tulips plays. Dalton seems a bit older than the boys he usually prefers, but he'll do. Renee then sends Josh into the fervor to find Dalton, despite them both having literally no way to know that he's currently there. As we see Demon Dalton, or Double D as I like to refer to him, about to kill Chris with a wire, he suddenly stops after sensing Josh is trying to free the real Dalton. And after freeing him from an ancient demon's clutches with no real resistance, Josh holds back the red door as they're pursued by the red demon, as Dalton's sent back to his real body. All of this began with Dalton painting the picture of the red door with his own blood, so once back to the real world, as Josh is holding the door shut, Dalton paints over the picture in black and manages to cover it just before the creature can get through. With there now being no real threat from the demon, Josh then meets his dad, who was just trying to beat him earlier for old time's sake, before returning to his body too. And after making his way back to the real world, he then sees Elise's spirit, not fully remembering who she is, but knowing that she's someone special. And the movie then comes to its end with Josh still being divorced, but hugging his eldest son, while we hear the actor Patrick Wilson singing with the band Ghost over the credits, as it's the only Insidious movie to end without featuring something insidious at the end. Well, unless you're disturbed by the prospect of a healthy family dynamic. They usually end setting up some sort of sequel or spin-off to the series, but in this case there's nothing to hype up, as the series has finally come to its end, is what I would say if I wasn't lying to you, because a movie called Fred: An Insidious Tale is currently in development and supposedly features a married couple attempting to use a spell to travel back in time to stop the death of their daughter. And with Insidious: The Red Door becoming the highest grossing film out of the entire series, chances are we won't be seeing the end of this franchise anytime soon, especially if the new spin-off proves to be a hit, because money is nice, me want more. Before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to help support the channel. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or a patron yourself, not only are you just being a great support, but you also get access to a few little bonuses, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can see uncensored versions of all videos going forwards. Starting off with this week's new YouTube member signups, a massive thank you to Dorak, Janalee Franco, Pock, Alex Prody, Jansen, Devlin Leverin, Caffey Burned, Tristan, Sir Dominic, Madison, Emo69, K Thomas, Starlord, Seth Stevens, X2 Ruby69, Mad Skills, Martin Schmidt, Aaron Thompson, Niall Newman, Roberto D. Francisca, and Eric Sourceguard. And moving over to this week's new Patreon signups, a big thank you to Brandon W. Rogers, Gohama, Reno Milvid, Cherex, Pablo Galagos, Grace, Elskull, Scott the Whistle Knot, Rachel Dixon, Julian Kona, Austin Perry, Travis Jones, Shane Bethany, Joel Bonatron, Max Han, Joey, Noah Parsons, Skull XXZ, Luke Dickinson, Michael Buxton, Flo Ratide, Jacob, Emery, Ryan Ferrick, Mark Huben, David Ogden, JTEZ420, Assetto Photography, Kieran Lugar, Melissa, Carly, Kyle Turnbull, ShineInfo666, Darren Bell again, Alexis Robinson, CJ, Guitarded, X43ROZ, and Brian Kyles. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.